My name is Vince Franz, and I'm seeking my Master's of Arts in Special Education with an emphasis on learning and behavioral disorders from Eastern Kentucky University. This is my capstone project in which I analyze the perspective of students with learning disabilities regarding primary source analysis and cooperative learning. The purpose of this study is to take into consideration the opinions of students regarding the effect of teaching strategies on their learning. When seeking the success of all students in the classroom, it's important to pay special attention to making sure students who are most at risk for failure, such as those with learning disabilities, are in fact learning. While teachers often employ research-based strategies in their classroom to achieve this goal, one cannot forget the importance of their particular students' perspectives. In general, factors such as intrinsic motivation and burnout are strong predictors of performance, so it should come as no surprise then that similar factors exist within the classroom. Students' motivation can be the factor that leads to learning success, so vital to success in the classroom is the teacher's use of strategies that yield student engagement and motivation to learn. In my own experience as a teacher, I've often implemented strategies that have proven through various studies to work for students, and my administrators have heavily invested in certain research-based teaching programs with the assumption that the strategies will work for our particular students. For example, my school district implements the Kagan cooperative learning approach in all its K-12 locations. As a history teacher, I regularly combine Kagan with a research-based curriculum developed by Stanford University called Reading Like a Historian. What was not taken into consideration by me is the perspective of the real students in my classroom who are affected by these strategies. There's simply an assumption on my part that because these strategies are backed by evidence, my students would view the strategies as helpful and succeed. It's the realization of this somewhat blind assumption that led me to my research question. How do students with learning disabilities perceive the effect of primary source analysis and cooperative learning strategies on their learning? The review of literature on the subject was organized by the positive and negative effects of primary source analysis and cooperative learning. What was revealed in the literature regarding the positive effects of primary source analysis was that the alternative traditional method to teaching history is inadequate. When students rely on a textbook or a lecturer for information, which is the traditional form of teaching history, they learn that history is about taking as fact the opinion of a secondary source. In other words, teaching history by presenting students with someone else's opinion, even expert opinion, communicates that history is simply a series of facts to memorize, which couldn't be further from the truth. When students use primary sources to make historical arguments, it solves the aforementioned problem by allowing students to think critically about history, and they get more out of the lesson than traditional textbook history teaching. On the negative side, teachers have to be careful when they use primary source analysis as their primary means of teaching, as primary sources can easily be taken out of context and lead to misunderstandings of history. It was also the case that many teachers have found it difficult to engage students in text-based discussions and therefore resorted back to lecturing or even making moral points from a present cultural perspective, which ties back to that initial negative concern about taking sources out of context and leading students to misunderstandings. Now, cooperative learning is really about students depending on each other for their learning tasks, which is referred to as social interdependence. In other words, students are cooperating to learn, which is where the strategy derives its name. Across many contexts, research has shown that the greater the cooperative learning that occurred among students, the greater the increase in both motivation and achievement. And it's these categories that strike at the core of my research. There's a clear correlation between cooperative learning strategies and an increase in student motivation, curiosity, and perseverance, as well as increased learning outcomes. However, teachers often have a hard time implementing cooperative learning strategies in such a way that include the fundamental components of cooperative learning. Furthermore, certain strategies are difficult to implement, and students present managerial problems for the teacher. When pulling the literature together, It's evident that both teaching strategies led to increased student learning and improved student attitude regarding the content and learning process. Yet even still, neither strategy was universally successful. In fact, in several cases, negative social interdependence increased motivation and achievement, such as competitions between students. And absent in the literature was an explicit focus on the perspectives of students with learning disabilities, which wraps back around to the purpose of this research. The research was conducted at a Southern Kentucky high school. Since it's true that perception, engagement, and motivation play an important role in students' success in the classroom, students' subjective experiences must be valued to determine the effectiveness of teaching strategies. For this reason, the research was an ethnographic case study, and the results are not to be used to represent a broader population of all students with learning disabilities. The purpose was rather to share a story of student experiences. My goal was to gain a deeper understanding of my own students' perception and to provide a model for teachers' evaluation of their students. I needed to sample an equal number of students with and without IEPs or individual education plans, so criterion sampling was used. My first source of data came from entry and exit interviews with 4 students, half with and half without IEPs. Of my students with IEPs, 2 were chosen at random, 1 male and 1 female, and the same is true for the students without IEPs. The students were given an entry and exit interview with me, one at the beginning of the 6-week research duration and one at the end, to gauge their perspectives on our learning strategies in a more open-ended fashion. For my other source of data, all the 149 students in my U.S. history classes, including 3 seniors and 146 juniors, were given 3 feedback forms over the course of 6 weeks using the Google Forms survey platform, which included Likert-type ratings of students' perception of their learning when engaging in primary source analysis, cooperative learning, and other strategies employed that would not classify in either category. Feedback Form 3 required the students to answer open-ended questions related to the teaching strategies used over the course of the 6 weeks. Now here you see data from Student Feedback Form 1. Round Robin and Mixed Pair Share are both cooperative learning strategies. Structured Academic Controversy and In-Class Source Readings are primary source analysis activities, and lectures, at-home videos, and quizzes all refer to teaching and learning strategies that don't fit into either category. For each cooperative learning strategy, more students found the strategies as helpful to their learning than not. Each cooperative learning and primary source analysis strategy received more 4 ratings than any other rating, with the exception of Mixed Pair Share, for which 31 respondents rated the strategy at a 3 and 30 students rated the strategy at a 4. Each non-cooperative learning strategy also received more 4 ratings than any other rating, with the exception of quizzes, for which 31 respondents rated the strategy at a 3 and 30 students rated the strategy at a 4. Quizzes, however, did earn the highest percentage of level 5 ratings. When compared to their counterparts on Student Feedback Form 1, the cooperative learning activities on Student Feedback Form 2 received significantly higher ratings. The cooperative learning strategies rated on Student Feedback Form 2 followed a continually positive trend, with the exception of primary source analysis, which peaked at a 4 and then slightly decreased in its level 5 rankings. Even with this slight decrease, primary source analysis still had more positive ratings than any strategy reviewed on Feedback Form 1. For every strategy not classified as either a cooperative learning or primary source analysis on Student Feedback Form 2, more students found the strategy as helpful to their learning, with the exception of textbook reading. Textbook reading was the only strategy on either feedback form with more students rating the activity as not helpful to their learning. Textbook reading was not classified, again, as either a cooperative learning or primary source analysis activity. Now, to obtain a variety of responses from students, Student Feedback Form 3 asked students 2 open response questions. What class activities have helped you learn the most? And What class activities have we done that do not help you learn? The category that received the largest number of positive reactions was cooperative learning. The next highest category was teacher-led activities. The responses in this category typically referred to lectures, class conversations, guided notes, or going over answers to questions as a group. Following the teacher-led activities was primary source reading. This category included responses related to debates, since every debate in class revolved around the primary sources, so debates in class necessarily related to primary source readings. Of the 62 total responses for activities that do not help you learn, 41 fell under the category of individual learning activities. Most individual activities perceived by the students as the least helpful related to textbook reading, reflecting the attitudes demonstrated on Student Feedback Form 2. Only 2 students mentioned the cooperative learning strategies as not helpful, and no students specifically mentioned the primary sources directly. The student interviews also revealed positive dispositions toward cooperative learning particularly. Every student interviewed in both the entry and exit interviews claimed that at some point during the conversation that discussions or group work helped them learn or contributed to the students wanting to learn more. Similarly, none of the interviewees claimed that cooperative learning or primary source analysis failed to help them learn in any way. Student 4, who was a male without an IEP, surprisingly stated in both his intro and exit interviews that while discussions helped him learn the most because he could hear other people's perspectives, teacher-led discussions and lectures helped him engage with the content and led him to wanting to learn more after the class was over. On the other hand, students with IEPs seem to unanimously view teacher-led activities in a more negative light. When asked in the exit interview if she enjoyed the class, student 1, who had a learning disability that affected her reading and cognitive learning abilities, said, quote, "I enjoyed the class, but sometimes I got bored if the teacher talked for too long," end quote. In a similar statement, student 2, who had an IEP for ADHD, a tic disorder, and an anxiety disorder, stated, quote, "The part about the class that helps me learn the least is having to listen to the teacher," end quote. When considering the student feedback forms and the interview responses, students with and without IEPs overwhelmingly found cooperative learning and primary source analysis as helpful to their learning. On the other hand, students with IEPs tended to rank individual and teacher-led learning strategies as less helpful to their learning. It seemed as though the ideal universal learning environment for the student population reflected in my study would be one that offered choices for independent learning, whether it be through textbook reading or pre-recorded lectures, with each learning choice followed by a quiz that could be taken until the content was mastered. From there, the students would participate in a whole class conversation revolving around primary sources, and the closing formative activity would involve cooperative learning structures with the task of using primary sources to answer a central historical question. The most substantial limitation of this study is its internal validity. The conclusions, such as students with or without IEPs having similar perspectives about cooperative learning and primary source analysis, cannot be generalized to the broader population. The study also raised a series of unanswered questions that would be worthy of future study, since it would be an overgeneralization to assume that because many students did not find the particular textbook readings useful, that students would find all forms of textbook instruction as unhelpful. So when student feedback revealed an overall negative perception of textbook reading when compared to the other teaching and learning strategies, it begged the question whether other methods of textbook instruction would yield different results. This specific dilemma with the textbooks reflects a broader question that was unanswered. Would there be ways to teach students with IEPs to get more out of independent learning? In other words, did the way independent learning was conducted in my research contribute to the students with IEPs more negative perspectives? And if so, how could this be changed to lead to better results? And another question that came from the study is the lack of knowing whether the students' positive perspectives were more reflective of the students just enjoying socialization rather than their opinion of how the teaching strategies actually affected their learning. The positive ratings from students could be more reflective of students just enjoying talking to their friends rather than a valid measure of their learning perception. And then a further question worth asking is, would that difference even matter? If students are having more fun because they're talking to their friends, assuming the classroom is managed well and the conversations occurring are content related, assuming students that would learn more when they were more comfortable with their partner is a logical hypothesis. And that concludes my capstone project, analyzing the perspective of students with learning disabilities regarding primary source analysis and cooperative learning. Thank you so much for your time.